Good evening. I wanted to welcome everybody here. Thank you for coming out to the library. This is a town hall meeting, so I hope you all brought your questions, and if you have anything you want to talk about, I will be taking questions. I'm going to give a brief presentation and then open it up for questions. You know, today is September 11th, and it's been 11 years since the World Trade Center and the September 11th attack. And so I think it's fitting to discuss that for a minute before I move on to some of the other topics. September 11th, really, it brings up began an era, really, an era of about, 10, 11 years now that we've been at war. Those wars are starting to wind down. The war in Iraq is now ended. The war in Afghanistan is scheduled to end on 2014. But I think that it's been a time that we really have to look back and see, what happened in those years. And in a lot of ways, it was not good for us because we've spent a lot of money on the wars. We've lost a lot of our, soldiers in the war. It's been something that, I think we need to move in new directions, of course. And to me, I believe that terrorism really is a criminal act. When we're attacked or anybody's attacked by a group of individuals, they're not a state, that it should be treated as a criminal act. And I believe that the attack that was done on Osama bin Laden and taking him out, that really was you were holding him accountable. It was holding an individual accountable, and that's really the best way to respond. I don't believe in the idea of holding a whole country accountable or holding whole people accountable for the acts of their leaders or the acts of a small group of religious extremists. So I believe that treating terrorism that way is really in America's best interest. But I want to praise President Obama. He's really moved us from a policy under George Bush of what I would call unilateralism, where the United States acted alone. We went into Iraq as a unilateral move. I think we alienated our allies. That was, France and Germany. There was a split between us and Europe about, how to handle this situation. And under President Obama, we've really moved to a multilateral policy. We're now working more with our allies around the world. We have less enemies, I think, than we did at that time. And so our foreign policy, to me, has been much better. We've engaged in Libya, but it was done under the auspices, the UN, and we went in with our allies, and it was a very limited mission. And the idea of ending wars and not starting new ones, to me, is very important. Now, I see the trouble that's kind of on the horizon. We hear about Iran, and we just heard Mitt Romney most people here probably saw the Republican convention and saw what he said about Iran. And what he was talking about was invading the country. He was talking about bombing Iran, really. He says, we're not going to let this stand. And it's a very dangerous time in the world. We are at a period now where things seem fairly good, but very suddenly things can change. I heard a lecture this morning. It was by a retired admiral. He was talking about how vulnerable we are because of our dependence on foreign oil and our dependence on oil in general. And that if there was trouble with Iran, if the Strait of Hormuz was closed, this really would send the world economy, not just America, but into a tailspin. So we have to treat these issues very carefully, and I believe the re-election of President Obama is a very important event that must occur to keep us on have a cool hand on the trigger rather than Mitt Romney, who's made some rather rash statements about how he would handle the Iranian crisis going nuclear. So that was a little bit, just telling you a little bit about foreign policy. A little bit about myself, and obviously most of you who have not met me, tell you a little bit of why I'm running for Congress. My name is Jerry Tetalman. I am by trade, I'm a real estate broker, a real estate investor. I've done that the last 22 years. I've done that in Oceanside and Carlsbad. But I'm also a political activist. I've been a long-time political activist. I became a political activist when I was in high school. I protested the Vietnam War. I went to a lot of protest rallies for that, and I learned something at that time, and what I learned was that as an individual, I could make a difference. I would there'd be large demonstrations, and you think, well, what good does it do for me to do that? Or a lot of people ask, what good does it do for one individual to vote? But when you add up all the people that take that political action, you begin to see results. And that's what it gave me a lesson, was that political action does lead to results. And so my decision to run for Congress really was about that I feel that as an individual, we all have a duty to speak up. And we have a duty to speak up, if there's injustice in the world, or, if there's issues that we feel we're not handling properly, that we need to speak out on those issues. And, as a political activist, you have twofold process. One is you educate yourself about the policies, you educate yourself about what's going on in the country, in the world, in the economy, with jobs, with education, all these different issues. But then the second step, you have to open your mouth. You have to tell people, what your opinion is. You have to get out there and say, hey, we shouldn't be trampling our environment. We shouldn't be, not providing quality public education to people. We shouldn't be cutting people off of Medicare. We shouldn't be cutting people off of Medicaid, whatever. We're cutting back on Social Security. These are issues that we have to speak out on. So as a political activist, that's the second step. The second step is to speak out. And so I chose to run because this is where I live. I felt that I wanted to run for Congress. It would give me a chance to, champion some of these issues. And, Darrell Issa, on the other hand, my opponent, really has opposed much of what I stand for. First of all, he doesn't believe in the idea of a public debate. I've challenged Darrell Issa to a debate. We held a debate in the primary, but Darrell Issa did not show up to that debate. He refused. He sent us a letter saying no, he would not come. In the general election, I've challenged him to a debate, and his response has been no response. But in the paper, he did answer. The North County Times reporter had asked him, and he said that he's really not campaigning. He's running on his record, and he doesn't feel that he needs to debate. And so these are kind of things that most people believe in, the idea of democracy, and that democracy is about ideas. It's about championing ideas, and that the public debate is an important part of that process. As I look forward to the presidential debates that are coming up, I think that those really let you know where people stand on the issues. I wanted to cover a few issues because I think that's what really the campaign's about. It's not really about personality. It's not about good looks, even though I have both of those. It's about the issues. So let's talk about a few issues that are important to people. Darrell Issa, he held some hearings in February of this year, and those hearings were the contraception hearings. We had only male religious leaders present, and they were to discuss contraception, the idea of that the government wasn't supposed to, interfere with the government. I mean, religion and government. There was people that wanted to have their health care paid for the contraception, and the government said, yes, you have to do this, and he said, no, you don't. So he had these hearings, but he wouldn't allow Sandra Fluke to testify. He wouldn't, the Democrats, there were no women on the panel, and they walked out. The Democrats walked out, and of course, you know what happened with Sandra Fluke. Rush Limbaugh called her some names, and that kind of progressed on. And so we kind of see where they stand. But this is really a bigger issue because it's not just about contraception. It's about Roe versus Wade. It's about the right for, a woman to choose between her and her doctor, what happens to her body, whether she, has a child or not. And I think we've seen this play out really recently with Todd Akin saying, a woman could be raped and she has the ability not to have a child. I'm like, that's absurd. But the other thing is there's been a concerted effort on the Republican Party's part to roll back state by state, to add regulation after regulation, to change the laws and eventually challenge Roe versus Wade. So this election between myself and Darrell Issa, between Mitt Romney and President Obama, is going to change the Supreme Court, how these issues will play out. And so this is a very important election because the president, his term is only 4 years, but the Supreme Court, when you appoint somebody, that is for the life of the Supreme Court justice. So that is an issue that we really stand at odds on. Now, some of the other issues, of course, are energy and the environment. Darrell Issa has a terrible record on energy and in the environment. He opposes high-speed rail in California. I believe that, high-speed rail is a very important, future for California. Every country that is leading the way is innovative. China, Japan, France, England, all have high-speed rail. Why don't we have high-speed rail? Because we don't have the political will to do that. It is coming. It is approved in California. He opposes that. The other thing that he opposes is the President Obama increased the CAFE standards, and the CAFE standards are the fuel standards for cars. I think it's by the year 2025, we're going to have a fuel standard of 55 miles per hour. And why is that important? Because we're very vulnerable to imported oil. If you look at where our oil comes from or global warming, these issues really have to do with our consumption of oil. And the first step in a new energy policy is to push for innovation. I think innovation is so important because, you know, I drive a Prius, and I used to drive a Maxima. I got 23 miles a gallon, I get 46 miles a gallon. That's innovation. You've doubled the efficiency. The same thing is true of light bulbs. You can go from incandescent bulbs to fluorescent, or you can go to the LEDs, which are even better. But you can increase that efficiency. It's the first step to take. And it is important not just for the environment, you know, to prevent climate change, but it's also important for us politically that we don't want to be dependent on fossil fuels. We don't want to be dependent on oil from other countries. So these are some of the issues where we really stand, you know, opposed. Now, there's other issues as well. Of course, there's education. I think that, you know, a lot of people, the biggest issue, of course, is the recession, jobs. How do we get jobs? How do we get out of the recession? We're working our way out of the recession. But to me, education is very critical in that process. Education makes you competitive in the world. You know, at the end of World War II, we were basically the only industrialized country left at that point. But now we're competing with countries around the world: India, China, Japan, South Korea, Germany. There are many, many countries that are highly technological, have an industrial base that we're competing with. And how do we compete? We have to have a highly educated workforce. Now, the problem in education right now, we have a lot of students that maybe want to do this, but there's cutbacks on student loans. We have to support the idea of subsidizing education. I believe that it's a shame when you have someone who has the ability to achieve, to become a scientist, to become an engineer, but can't do it because they don't have the economic means. You know, the difference really between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is they believe in a hand up. I believe not in a handout. I don't believe the idea that, you know, I want people on welfare and the state's going to take care of you. I don't believe in that idea. I believe that you get a helping hand. That means you get a student loan, you go to college. You get a loan to buy a house. You know, it's a VA loan, an FHA loan. The government gives you a hand. You get in with a low down payment. You get a hand up. All of a sudden, you become a homeowner. You're doing better. It's this idea of government helping people to do better, but it's not the idea that the government has to subsidize you your whole life. So that's really the difference. And I think that, you know, as a Democrat, I support that idea. I support the idea of a society that is cooperative. I believe that we're all interconnected. We're all dependent on each other. And I believe that we all need to do well. If there's a part of our society that is not doing well, you know, we're all not doing well. It affects every one of us. And I believe that you know, what came out in this convention actually with the appointment of Paul Ryan, it really focused on the idea of Medicare, Social Security, the idea that they want to privatize it. And Darrell Issa is part of this push. He wants to privatize things. His big bill, too, is about the postal workers. Post office, he wants to privatize the post office. Basically, it's going to lay off 100,000 postal workers. And the idea with Social Security and Medicare is that they're going to have you a voucher system. So the voucher system, you're kind of on your own. It's like you can go, here's a voucher, go buy some health care. It really doesn't work. Now, you know, my background too, my first career I was a registered nurse. I did that for 10 years. And so I know a little bit about health care. I used to work at Tri-City Hospital. I worked in the emergency room there. It was my last job. And I see people slip through the cracks. When I used to work there, it was pretty awful because people would come in, they had an acute situation, and they would be treated because a hospital has to treat you in an emergency room. But the reality was if you didn't have insurance, you kind of were whisked out of there at some point. You were not receiving the treatment that you really needed. And I believe that the Affordable Health Care Act is a very important piece of legislation. What's really important about that is that it does allow you now with pre-existing conditions. There's people that have pre-existing conditions. I met a young guy the other day. He had a heart condition. He was only 20 years old, but he said, I couldn't get insurance until the Affordable Health Care Act was passed. He could not get insurance. The other thing is lifetime caps. Before, insurance companies could have a lifetime cap on your insurance and say, okay, you've used up your insurance. Yeah, you're still sick, but that's your problem. You're out of luck. And so some of these things really are very important. The other thing, of course, covering more people. We can now cover a lot more people under the Affordable Health Care Act. The Republicans, including Darrell Issa, have tried to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act about 32 times in the Congress. They don't have the votes to do it, but it has just been a relentless move to say that this so-called Obamacare is a terrible piece of legislation, when in reality, it really helps a lot of people. And the biggest part of it is that health care is now more affordable. There's a cap on it, on how much, when you pay your premium, 85% of your premium has to go for health care. 15% can go for administrative costs, CEO pay, their profits. But before that, there was no limit on that. So there's been a huge amount of rebates that have been given because of the Affordable Health Care Act. And this helps bring down the health care. Now, my real goal is not just supporting the idea of Affordable Health Care Act, but we should move in the direction that every other industrialized democracy has done, and that is to have a universal health care system and a single-payer system. Thank you. Thank you. Because single-payer system, we spend the highest percentage of our GDP, I believe it's 17% on health care, of any country in the world, yet we have a much lower rate. I think we're 37th in terms of the real results that we get in that. If you look at a lot of other countries, Europeans, Canadians, Japanese, they spend a very low percentage on health care and they get a much higher return, have a higher longevity rate. And so moving to that system, I know nationally we do not have the political will to go to a single payer right now. There's been so much pushback just on the Affordable Health Care Act. But the state of California has tried to do this several times. They passed a bill for single payer, and it may come in the future that we start in California to get that done. So that's my take on healthcare and the importance of it. And I think that, you know, the other issues, of course, is the economy. A lot of people want to talk about, Jerry, how are you going to get jobs? How are you going to solve the economic problem? Well, the real answer is you got to get back to the basics. And the basics are this, that America is become a great economic power because we're great innovators. And when I say great innovators, we're on the cutting edge. We come up with new products, new ideas. If you look at places that are doing very well right now, you could look at Silicon Valley, you can look at Google and Facebook. These are new ideas, companies that have skyrocketed in a very short period of time with a highly educated workforce because they're innovators. We need, right here in San Diego, we have a great biotech industry. I talked to somebody that owns a biotech company in Sorrento Valley. And that company, he said, is only here because of one reason. That's because UCSD is here, the Salk Institute is here. That's government-funded research. There's a relationship between government and government-funded research and new ideas and new products. San Diego has a great biotech industry. We have a great telecommunications industry with Qualcomm. These ideas come out of research, and so we need to support that. And there's been a lot of cutbacks in research, and that's not the place to cut back. Education is not the place to cut back. We do need to cut back. A lot of people look at the budget and say, how are you going to balance the budget? We're going to go over this fiscal cliff. We have this huge deficit. I agree. The deficit is a major problem. We spend about 40 cents of every dollar on debt. That's an unsustainable situation. How do you balance the budget? You have to cut back on a lot of things. You have to have fair taxation, number one. When you look at Darrell Issa, you look at Mitt Romney, you look at the Republican Party, what are they pushing? They want to maintain the Bush-era tax cuts that were given. Those give a gift to the wealthiest people in this country, and they try to balance the budget on the backs of the sick, on the backs of the working class, on the backs of the poor. And to me, that's not the way to go. The rich need to pay their fair share. You had Warren Buffett come out and say, tax me a little bit. He had his secretary at the State of the Union address. What did she say? I pay 35%. Warren pays 17%, and he makes a lot more than his secretary. This idea of fair taxation is very important. Why do we have laws that are not fair like that? Well, it has to do with money. If you look at politics, and it's been an eye opener for me to run in this and see how important money is in the political process. We had a recent decision with Citizens United. People might be familiar with that. It was a Supreme Court decision that allows unlimited money into politics, super PACs, anonymous money. This has moved us in the wrong direction. We need to amend the Constitution. It's the only way to really override that. But it's a very important thing because our government is corrupt. Every government, of course, is corrupt, but ours suffers from a special type of corruption, and that is undue influence of corporations in government and special interest money. And so getting the money out of politics is very important. That's really one of the best places to start. The other problem we have in Congress, we're not very bipartisan anymore. We have the Republicans here, we have the Democrats here, and we have no bills being passed. We have no cooperation. We lost our credit rating. The United States went from a AAA credit rating to a AAA minus credit rating. Why? Because we had a non-functional government. We can't agree. The Democrats and the Republicans can't agree. Has a little bit to do with a guy named Grover Norquist. I don't know if does anybody know who Grover Norquist is? Okay. They signed a pledge, and to me, the idea of signing a pledge for anything really is not the good idea. Democracy is about debating. It's about public conversation. It's about making a decision, not pre-deciding by a pledge. You know, I think it really comes down to what Bill Clinton said, which is it's the arithmetic. It doesn't add up. When you look at Mitt Romney and he says, okay, I want to increase defense. I'm going to drastically increase defense spending. I'm going to give the wealthiest people, they're still going to get their big tax break. Where does the numbers come where he's going to be a fiscal conservative to cut the budget? He's probably going to cut it on Medicare. He's going to cut it on Social Security. So it's not going to balance. But it is important that we do, solve this problem. But it's not going to be solved by saying that we're not going to raise any revenue. We're going to sign this pledge. You're going to have a non-functional government. And I think that, I do believe in small government, but I believe in efficient government. It's not about the size of the government. It's about the efficiency of the government. That government is designed to solve problems. And that's really why we're here, to have a government that solves problems, not a government that creates problems. That must be a sign that I've been talking too long. I am going to open it up for some questions because I've just kind of given you a little smorgasbord of where I stand on issues, but everybody has their issue. Everybody has something that they want to talk about. So, go ahead and give me some questions and we'll have a little discussion. All right, who has a topic or a question?
I have a question.
Sure.
Where do you stand on solar and wind energy in San Diego County?
San Diego County really can be a leader in solar and wind energy, and we are moving in that direction. My opponent, Darrell Issa, opposes that, but I think that it really is about wind and solar. He had this big thing about investigating Solyndra, which was up in the Bay Area. But I believe that green technology is the way to go, and it's for several reasons. One, we do need to get off of imported oil. The other one is global warming. We have a climate crisis. We're seeing the effects of that. It's no longer a theory or a hoax, as Rick Santorum would say. It is measurable. It's real. It's occurring. And to me, we live in an area of highly educated people. We live in an area of great amount of sun and resources. And I think that we can be a leader in that area. We can be a leader in using electric vehicles, solar, wind, but not just that, in doing research too for other technologies, perfecting fuel cells and batteries and different things. So we have to be on the cutting edge. And whether it's here in San Diego or other places in America, it's very important. But I think that that's the future for us. And it's not even just the future, it's really right now. But it is. It's about innovation. America is the great innovator. We've always been the great innovator, and that is, how we lead. And the critical thing is that we produce technology that is environmentally friendly, but not just for us, but to export to the world, because the rest of the world is industrializing. They're going through this huge change from China is going from an agricultural society to an industrial society. They're moving to the cities, and the amount of energy they're using is tremendous. But if we can export, vehicles that are highly efficient, solar systems highly efficient, these products can be used around the world that will change the situation. It can't just be America, and we have to work too with the international community. These things. Unfortunately, the leadership wasn't there. Under George Bush, there was a lot of obstinance to the Kyoto Protocol, and we really need to agree with the other countries of the world and have international law and international standards as to what is acceptable levels of CO2 being produced.
I mean, what do you think of that? Why is it not
I heard something about this on the news tonight. I heard a little bit about that, but I don't fully didn't hear the whole story of what happened there. But I'll give you my take on that topic, though. I do believe that the United States should be a close ally of Israel, and that we have been. And both President Obama supports Israel, and Mitt Romney supports Israel, and that really isn't the issue. The issue is that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon. From all things that we can tell. Now, that's not been proven. They have not exploded a weapon, but of course, it looks from all evidence that that's headed in that direction. The question is, what do you do about it? Well, one option is a military strike. Could be done by the Israelis, could be done by the United States. The problem with that is that a lot of those bunkers are underground. When you bomb a country, it's an act of war. The retaliation for that probably would be attacks on the United States, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, or at least attempting to do that. It really could, get out of control very easily. One incident, war is like a wildfire. It just starts from one little spark and you don't know where it's going to go. So the idea is to try to, not do that if possible, not do the bombing. But to contain Iran, I believe that the sanctions are very important. And it really is not just the United States problem. It's not Israel's problem. It's the world's problem. And what we are doing is we're evolving as an international community. I wrote a book called One World Democracy, and this is about international law. And I'm a member of Citizens for Global Solutions. I was the president for a number of years in California. And the idea is that we need to expand our relationship with other democracies in the world. NATO is expanded now. NATO is most of Europe. The European Union is in there. We have peace in Europe after thousands and thousands of years of warfare in Europe. Two of the worst world wars came out of Europe. Why is Europe at peace now? Well, they solved their battles in courts. They solved their battles in parliaments. This idea that we can move from a world ruled by force to a world ruled by law, to me, is very important. And so with Iran, it is the international community that needs to act. America needs to take the lead on that, but it shouldn't be just Israel. It shouldn't be just America. It should be the international community through the UN, through cooperation with our democratic allies. And one of the things that I believe is that we should expand NATO, that NATO should include not just the democracies of Northern Europe, but we should open it up to other democracies that meet a certain standard around the world. We have a district that is very coastal, and the district goes, it starts in Del Mar, UCSD, actually straight up the coast, up to Dana Point. And, the ocean protecting the ocean is a very important item. Darrell Issa has supported the idea of drilling, drilling offshore. His philosophy is drill, baby, drill. You've seen this come out. He supports the Keystone Pipeline, which I oppose. I think that that's a very important issue, is protecting the environment that we do have. Of course, the other thing is, our economy. What can we do for our economy? I believe that one of the things that helps our economy in this area is innovation, education. We have some great schools here. We have great jobs. We have great, do biotech, and we do, telecommunications. We also have the military here. The military bases, I believe we should protect these. My thought, there are large cuts coming in the military. And in San Diego County, I think it's one out of every, I think it's 25% of the population have some source coming from the military, meaning they're getting their paycheck either as a civilian, consultant, or directly from the military. So it's important for us. But I believe we should close some of our bases around the world and consolidate them more for the ones that we have here. So those are a few of the issues. And of course, I think transportation is an issue for us. We have to have an efficient transportation system here. I think what you can do, first of all, you got to make a little noise. People aren't outraged that Citizens United decision went by, and we need to hear a voice. Now, we live in the age of the internet. And we are much more powerful than anybody that has ever existed in history. I remember when we had that incident with Susan G. Komen. They said, we're going to pull the funding from Planned Parenthood. Within 3 days, there was so many women on the internet outraged, blogging and sending emails and everything, that they changed their policy. So you as an individual now, you're all mini broadcasters. You have the ability to go on the internet and to put it out there on Facebook. You can put it out there on Twitter. You can put it out there, emails and blogs, and do all those things. You can write letters to the editor. There's things you can do. Maybe you write, sing songs. I don't know what your talents are, but we all have a special talent, but we have to get it out there. And you have to open your mouth, either by writing or speaking or doing something to get it out. But it's public outrage that changes it. And so the tools are much better than they've ever been. We're much more empowered, and don't believe the idea that you don't have the power. As an individual, you do have power. You just have to assert it. You're right. The long-term solution is changing the balance of the Supreme Court. That has to do with who's elected for president, whether it's Romney or whether it's Obama. And I think that that's the bottom line. The idea of doing an amendment to the Constitution, the political will that it takes to do an amendment to the Constitution is very large. You have to have, I think, a 2/3 majority. It's just not going to happen. So it is very important as to who the president is elected. But it's about making noise. If people are outraged, things change, and people, it's about championing your person for office. Elections change. The last time it swung really heavily to the Tea Party. This time I don't think so. I think it's swinging the other way. I think Obama did a great job at the convention. I thought Bill Clinton did a great job. I thought there was a lot of people out there who really did a great job. So I think that we have to support that effort. I'm part of that effort. I'm part of changing Congress so that you have a functional Congress. You can have a president in there that says, great things, but if the Congress is opposing him and blocking him at every move, you end up with not much happening. So. My expertise or whatever, I've written a book about, foreign affairs. And so, I like the idea of going Foreign Affairs Committee. That's something that I have an interest in. But I'm interested in a lot of other things. I'm interested in the environment. There's a lot of other committees. And I do believe in a balanced budget. I don't know that I would be on the budget committee, but it's something that I strongly believe in. I live my life with a balanced budget, meaning I always live below my means. I always spend less than what I earn, and you'll always have money. And so to me, the idea of the deficit to me is a problem that we have. So there's a lot of issues that are priorities, but I would see what happens. Thank you. It is working for Canada. If you talk to Canadians, they'll tell you something. They're nervous when they come to America. And what they're nervous about is the bankruptcy thing. Medical bankruptcy is the #2 cause of bankruptcy in this country. And so the idea of actually becoming sick and then having to file bankruptcy is something that doesn't exist in Canada. It doesn't exist in most of the countries of the democratic countries of the world. And they're afraid coming here that you don't have that kind of coverage. So it's not a perfect system. I'm not going to say that that the Canadian system or the British system or Japanese is perfect. There are things they do ration, and you have to ration health care, and you have to make sure it's evenly distributed. Sometimes you have to wait for certain procedures. It's not perfect. But in those systems, they spend a lot less money and they get a lot better results. And that's the bottom line. And, I start with a premise that healthcare is a human right. I believe that we don't let people, go without or die. There was a moment in the Republican debates with Ron Paul, and they asked Ron Paul, what would you do if a 30-year-old, he got in an accident, he had no health insurance, what would you do? And some guy in the audience yells out, let him die. And they start clapping. And I'm like, this is not America. That's not the kind of America I want to live in, where we say let somebody die because they've made that decision. Healthcare, it frees you up. If you have your healthcare is covered, you can change jobs. You're not locked into your job. The business owner, it's a lot easier. I've been a business owner for 22 years. I've hired a lot of people. It's a lot easier to hire people if you don't have to provide health insurance. The government is taking care of it. We're also more competitive in the world. The other countries are doing this. How can we compete when we're spending so much on health care? It's part of the fact that we're slipping. We have to be educationally competitive. We have to be competitive with health care. We have to look at other examples. America very rarely looks at other countries and goes, let's study this problem and see what other countries are doing. I wish we would. There's a lot of issues that we need to study. We need to study how our criminal justice system is an example. We have the most prisoners of any country in the world, the highest percentage and the most. Why don't we study other countries, see what are they doing? What are their drug laws? What are their criminal laws? We have to look at that, but we tend not to. There's a teacher strike right now in Chicago. I'm sure people have heard about that. And I do support the idea that, people need to have the right to have collective bargaining. Whether you're a public employee, whether you're working in the private sector, you should have the right to collective bargaining. And I believe that a lot pushed by Darrell Issa, by other Republicans to move towards privatization is a way of breaking the unions. When you look at this with teachers, when you look at going to charter schools, vouchers, number one, it's a way of breaking the unions. The other thing is it's a way of crossing the line between religion and state, that you're allowing the separation of church and state becomes a little more blurred when you do that. So I believe in public education. I think that's what built the middle class in this country. I believe unions built the middle class in this country. If you look at public education, anybody can come to this country, and through a system of public education, you can rise from poverty to the middle class to the upper class. That's the great thing about America. We have vertical mobility, and that vertical mobility is tied to our educational system. The same with the unions. The unions are what built the middle class in this country. If you want an example of a place where the unions don't exist, go to China. China, if you try to start a union, it's 10 years in prison. People get 30 cents an hour, and they work in dangerous conditions. That's how it used to be here 100 years ago. To me, the unions have built the middle class, and public education has built the middle class. It hasn't worked. The war on drugs has not worked. We have a high drug usage rate. We have a huge death toll in Mexico that is related to that war on drugs. That's really a war that's going on in Mexico, and we're responsible. We have a large degree of the responsibility because we're the country that's using the drugs. We're sending the arms down to Mexico. Our prisons are overflowing with people that are in there for drugs. My philosophy on drugs, when I worked in hospitals as a nurse, I used to treat a lot of people that were drug addicts. And there's really not much option for them. If you don't have money, there's no drug treatment for you. Unless you really have an insurance policy and somebody really backing you, you're not going to get off drugs. And most of the drugs are used by the heavy users. We need to change our philosophy, the idea of putting people in prison because they have a drug addiction. We need to put people in treatment centers and treat them. People get out of prison. They return to society. And you want to return a person to society that's a functioning person of society that's going to have a lower rate of recidivism. That's very important. I think that some of the drugs, such as marijuana, should be decriminalized, should be legalized, should be controlled, should be taxed. I think that the idea that, it's just like the Prohibition. In the Prohibition, in the 1920s, you had the gangs in Chicago. They were running liquor, and people drank anyway. It's just like that. People smoke marijuana. It's run by mafia, or the cartels. We need to legalize it. I'm not saying we need to promote it, but we need to tax it. And then with that money, just like we do with tobacco, tax it, take that money and educate people about, not using it or using it, not while they're driving, that kind of thing. Because I don't want to promote the use of drugs. I just don't want to see people's lives ruined because, somebody was smoking a little bit and went to jail, or a Mexican drug cartel, people are being killed over this. It's life and death for people. So that's my take on it. It's what you're talking about, really. It's an environment of poverty. You have an environment, especially in Mexico and other South American countries, there's a lot of poverty there. People don't have a lot of good choices about how do I make a living. And when you give them the option of, I could do drug trafficking and I can make lots of money versus there's very few opportunities, they begin to make that choice. So it is obviously about improving the economy, even in our country. The better the economy is, better people have choices. They have choices to go to school, to get an education, get good jobs. It's a better choice, but it has to exist. And so part of it is getting rid of poverty and empowering people through education. We do need to cut. We don't need to cut everything straight across the board. I have to look at each individual item on the budget and then cut things, some things more, some things less. I believe that we have cuts in military defense that I do agree with, but I believe that we should do that by cutting back, on some of our bases around the world, some of our expenditures, and being more efficient and having military designed for this current time period, not for the Cold War. So that's one area that we can get a savings on. The other, of course, is you can save money on healthcare by going to a single payer system. I think that saves a lot of money. You can also, I don't want to cut Social Security benefits, but I think we do need to raise the, if you make over $106,000, you're not taxed on Social Security. You're exempt from that. And I believe that that's really one of the places we need to tax people on. I think that would help balance Social Security. The other one, one of the reasons we have the deficit, if you look at it, when it got so bad, you had two unfunded wars, you had the recession, but you also had the Bush-era tax cuts, which gave the wealthy this big tax cut. So I think you have to look at that we have to let the Bush-era tax cuts expire. We have to have a system of fair taxation. But the key of balancing the budget, you don't want to go to severe austerity measures where you've cut everything, and that doesn't seem to work. What it is, you're trying to stimulate the economy, because the biggest controller of the budget or the deficit is how much the economy is producing in terms of income. So it's a balancing act between cutting the deficit and putting money into the economy, and you don't want to go too far one way or the other. Thank you for asking that question. I have an office in Carlsbad and I have an office in South Orange County, and I need people to volunteer. We have signs here. Everybody can take some signs home with them. I have bumper stickers. You can take those with you. But I need people to volunteer on the campaign. We have a very short window right now. We have less than 60 days to go to the election, and the mail-out ballots are going out in about 30 days. So we have to really get on with it. I know some of you are able to make phone calls and knock on doors or do computer work with us. We need volunteers, whatever your skills are. The other thing, of course, we need to raise money. I wish it wasn't so. I wish that money wasn't in politics, but the reality is, if you want to succeed in the game, you got to raise money. So if you don't have the time, or if you have the time and you have the inclination, please donate to the campaign. Get involved with us. Love to do some work with you and pass the word out to your friends, your neighbors. Speak to people, get them involved. Working in politics, the best thing you can do too, work your precinct. Where you live, there's a little area around your precinct. Go door to door, get the people out. On election day, you tell them, hey, come on out. There's a lot of things you can do. So I think we each individually know what we can do. We just have to go ahead and find the courage to do it. So I want to thank you very much.